I'm gonna hit. Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Ushakov from the plan stage, and I'm here today with Will. I'll let him introduce himself, but he's going to give us some feedback about some of the portfolio planning capabilities, including roadmaps. So,
hey, yeah, thank you, Melissa. So my name is Will Szabo. I am the new Senior Security Program Manager, somewhat of a experimental role within security department. So I'm bringing in some outside experience in project, program, and portfolio management, which intersected really well with this part of the product. So I'm happy to be dogfooding and having this conversation with Melissa. So we started chatting about this a few weeks now, I think, ago, when I got a task to look at how we were doing one of these larger project initiatives within security, and see if we could use the road mapping features within the tool set as opposed to what we were doing within Google Sheets or PowerPoint. And so that started down the path of exploring this part of the functionality that I hadn't had a lot of experience with, and my conversations with Melissa. So hopefully it gives you a little bit of a background.
It does. So I think a good place to start would be, what are you all doing today?
Sure, sounds good. So I'm going to share my screen. This is something that we were just looking at a moment ago. So we have within this larger initiative several pieces of work that fit into blocks of time and fit into multiple different areas who are doing affected work. So this isn't work that's just sitting in security, it's also sitting in engineering and in some other areas. So this is we're talking about Fedramp. So this is an overview of the Fedramp kind of timeline that we received from our partner that we're working with. And this started the conversation because we started to build something similar to this within PowerPoint for this section 0, because we actually have to do some pre-work that has multiple epics, multiple issues, some child epics within it. And it started the conversation of, can we use the tool to do this? And let me see.
So to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, the numbered steps across the top are phases, right?
Yes.
The line at the center that contains dots, those are sort of like milestones.
It's a milestone timeline.
And then at the bottom is the activities that fall under each phase. So for one, you would have that in-process designation, authorization planning, and review agency of SS. And yeah, that bottom one.
Yep. These would be individual sets of activities, sets of issues, tasks that would be done as it progresses across the Chevron timeline. And they tried to mirror the overlapping section or phase above, as well as the timeline of milestones. So within this, if I were structuring it in my head, using just the functionality that I understand today, each one of these phases above might equate to a sub project, with each of these steps below equating to an epic, with each thing beneath that being child epic, and both of those having sets of issues within them.
Cool.
I could do the things across the top as epics, the things in the middle as sub epics, or child epics, sorry, and then I would just have to think about, yeah, these all could be child epics, and maybe they're just all issues underneath, or some of that child epics have child epics, which may get a little bit more convoluted.
Quick question, and my assumption here is that the work being done through this whole thing would be different teams?
It has multiple teams on it, both inside security and outside security group.
Okay, thank you.
Which does come to one of our things that we noticed about, or one of the things that I noticed about the current functionality, is that it's really a roadmap of a single project. When you have multiple projects, you have to have multiple roadmaps. And when you have a single project, really it's only within one group. And I may not be right about that, but that's
You are. That's kind of why
okay.
I was asking that to highlight this use case, because that's something that we're thinking about.
Yeah, so definitely within the scope of the work that I'll be doing, almost exclusively, it will be work that has that has groups in security and outside of security, all doing work for a specific purpose that would feel more like a program and less like a project. And the projects in those different groups will probably be contained within those groups. So for me, it's a use case that says, hey, when we have things that span multiple projects, do we have this idea of a program within our functionality that allows for those projects to be in different groups and subgroups? And the same being true if I expand it a little bit more and I say I've got a portfolio of projects or projects and possibly programs. How do I manage all of that and get visualization of all of that and get time, information, and structure that can help me manage that effectively? So that's the lens that I was bringing to the functionality of today, and kind of looking at it and saying, oh, interesting.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you for explaining that. I'm super curious as you move through to see what your setup looks like and how it's working for you.
Yeah, so what's interesting is I went and we may want to pause the recording for just a moment, if you could do that and do the recording.
Yeah, we had paused it while Will found the exact view that he needed, but we're back.
So what I was doing is I came into the security department, and I had previously looked at a roadmap of all of the work within security department, and I said to myself, well, first I went here and was like, don't remember where to find roadmaps, and then I remembered it's actually underneath the epics. So when I come in and I look at the overall work within the security department, one of the first things that I noticed was this milestone section at the top. And this did confuse me as a user, a new user to it, because when I think in my discipline about milestones, they're a singular point in time. They don't have duration. So with that, when I looked at the milestones and started to look at these, they seem to have duration, which confused me a bit. But they also didn't follow this side panel. What I was kind of expected to see was each milestone underneath this collapsible menu of areas. So seeing this big blank space over here confused me as a user. So that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up for you.
Yeah, I think just to step in a bit, I think you've seen that we use milestones as sort of like sprints and or quarters. Yeah, but that's definitely, I think, something that's confusing. The naming of it means something very different in project management world.
Yeah, and the other piece that was I wasn't sure about was if this top header section, because one of the questions that came up was, can you explode this into some other time slicing, like phases or quarters, and that was that top section in that prior image. Was they were like, hey, can you group this by phases so that we can see what stuff is fitting into those as opposed to months and days. I didn't get far enough in the exploration of the tool to know that answer. So that was one of the things that I wanted to bring to the conversation.
Yeah, you can do this offline, but if you click on settings, there's some options there that might be interesting to you.
Got it. So you have the ability to do quarters. Okay. This year,
And
within
you can,
year.
yeah, you can also turn off milestones if that's not something that is relevant.
So one of the things that may be a feature idea is the idea of adding some level of custom groupings into this range section that would allow someone to create phases for longer tail things. And then the next part that I got into was seeing this bottom screen down here and what I really liked being able to see was the epic and sub-epic relationship and nesting. I liked that. And I also liked the ability to see the percent complete of those nestings. My assumption was that percent complete is not driven by time, but is driven by some level of closure of those things that are grouped within it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so if you open up settings very quickly, but that's great insight of maybe we can give more of that information up front. Do you see there at the bottom, progress tracking?
Mm-hmm.
You can do it either based on weight, so it's the sum of the issues underneath and like proportional, or purely by count of open closed. Got
it. Okay, awesome. Now, one of the things that the conversion of this to what I would normally call a roll-up report or a high-level overview was a little bit tricky, right? And that's where I went back to Jonathan and said, I looked at the functionality. It's not going to do what you want, because the more work that there is, the taller this is, and you can't transform it easily, like copy and paste it into some type of presentation. You will have to digest the information and figure out a way of rolling it up. Now, that type of a roll-up or a high-level view of a project or roadmap is something that's super common in my discipline. We often have to say, well, I just want to see the top level things, right? I just want to see. Now, from the way that I was looking at this, I could use larger nestings to create that top level grouping. So if I said, these might be too granular, let's put a set of epics above this that are a little higher level that will reduce the overall total count of each of these epics. And that may start to reduce the total size of the information. But what I would anticipate seeing is that, you know, for a long tail project, something that is multiple quarters, hopefully here not multiple years, but in my world, I'm used to you know, corporate programs that can run a year plus, and seeing that in this type of view would just create huge bars of blue that would just be everything, right? Everything would be a huge bar of blue, and then you would see some small percentage increase within it, which may not give that that slice that they're looking for of how does this fit into the overall run of the total project, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting things here that, yeah, I want to dig into a few of them just to give more context to the team. Yeah. So the first one is this workflow of creating a high level summary. So can you walk through who you're creating that summary for? What are they looking for? Just sort of like some of these review cadences and what those are like.
Yeah, absolutely. And so typically, and this is, I have to use outside GitLab because I'm too new here and haven't seen enough of these examples here to be able to use an internal one. But I guess I can try to do that. So we today do that for OKRs, right? You have a quarterly subset of these are the things that we're trying to accomplish. And we review those on a frequency every week to see progress against the total. If you look at our OKR page, which is driven out of Ally, you'll see generally these are the big blocks that the OKRs fall into, and these are the percentages of those that fall into that. That's, to me, very synonymous with how you might run a program. An OKR is just a set of work that needs to get done over a period of time, could easily fall into this model as well. Often when I'm looking at project reviews as part of an overall portfolio, I'm looking for key pieces of information. It probably came out of a kickoff where we set a high level timeline and related changes that were going to happen across that timeline, but didn't have the detail at that time. So I'm looking back at that original expectation and how things have changed related to that. So when I look at a roll-up, I'm looking at the interaction of what today's roll-up vision looks like compared to that original one from the kickoff, or some later point in time where things have been readjusted. Who am I that's doing that? Typically, it's your program leadership or external stakeholders who are looking to see how it affects them, because they may have other timelines, other efforts that are going on, and they're seeing whether the things are still going to lay out as intended. I'm looking for collisions. If I'm a department head and there's other things going on, I'm looking at where slips in one project's timeline may be affecting resourcing or budget for another project's timeline, and do I need to adjust? So that's where those roll-ups kind of play into effect. The first image that I showed you would be that first use case of I'm looking against a kickoff expectation versus what my current expectation is. And when I have to look at a kickoff presentation that's shown in that type of image slice, and then I look at a detailed one like what we're seeing on the screen now, it's harder for me to see the comparison between those two things. So often in the past, I would have asked the project team, hey, can you put this in a view that looks similar to this other one so that I can see how things have changed from that original expectation?
Yeah, so to kind of like translate that, thanks for that explanation. By the way, if I were to translate that to like what you need the roadmap to do, there's a couple of things that stick out to me. One is like more control over its scope, right? Would be the number one. And by the way, one thing that you should explore is that you can filter by labels as well. So that may be an option, but it's not necessarily intuitive, right? You kind of have to go through these sort of like workarounds to get the view that you want.
Yeah, so, I saw the use of filtering the results so that it fits more, and I did think about using whether or not to use labels in context, because my understanding, again, new guy understanding, use of labels is real for long-term. You know, you're not going to turn them on and off. Typically,
you can use them for anything.
Yes,
so.
but in our group, we tend to use labels for grouping things together, like a department's. Everything that's for that department might have a label, but more specifically, everything for a policy might have a label. Policy is not really going to change. Procedure might have a label. That's not really going to change.
I see.
When we start using them for this is for project A, then you start running into, well, I already have a project. Why would I need a label for the project?
Understood.
But I would if I want to do these type of machinations around feature set, right?
But it basically, okay, so thanks for explaining that. For your specific org, labels are used differently, so that's not necessarily an option, which may be the case for a lot of different customers, like external customers too.
Love the flexibility of the labels though, which allows you to use it in that A or B kind of scenarios.
But basically like filtering these view both in timeline and I'll call it like scope of epics, so that you get like the slice that you want would be useful. It sounds like sort of like reading between the lines of what you said is like having more types of work items would be helpful, because right now everything's an epic, so it's hard to define.
Well, definitely bounding by epic creates an issue in my use case where it crosses groups, because I can't have an epic that spans multiple projects.
Yeah, so that's another one, right? But for example, if we had something like epic features issues, you might be able to cleanly say only show epics and it would show everything that's relevant. But today, when you say show me epics, it's a lot of things, right? It's basically anything that's not a individual deliverable.
Yeah, and in my former agile practice, when we would have conversations with product or other groups about how do you group epics in a large scale framework, we would use something like a theme, being able to say, well, we've got a theme that has a bunch of epics that have a bunch of stories underneath it, right? Or it depends on
or capabilities depending
on, and functionally, as a engineering mindset, I don't have to have theme because I have epics and sub epics, and you can just have epic, right? And you can have an epic be your theme, and you can have sub epics be your epics, and you have sub epics. As long as there's not a limit on nesting, you don't necessarily have to call it something different. But from an outside the engineer mindset, I often would get executives confused when I talked about an epic with epics, because they would just kind of glaze over at that point, especially if they're business folks.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's definitely something that's on our radar of just creating more sort of like separate objects. So thanks for the validation there. And then I think being able to like quickly export the view would be useful, to like show it externally, snapshot it or something, right? Where you're able to like put it in a PowerPoint if you need to.
Right, and that's the tricky part with when you have someone who is a stakeholder but not a user, right? How do you get the information out and visualized to that stakeholder in a quick and easy fashion? Because you may not have a significant amount of time to custom build an image in PowerPoint, given a bunch of information, right? And often when I was department head, I would have project managers who might give data to a program manager who then would synthesize the data in a smaller way for me, because digesting all of the detailed level data was just too much or too onerous across multiple programs or multiple portfolios.
Understood. Yeah, so having those like different levels of granularity, so to say, in the views, and being able to almost adjust that, where one of them may be more like higher level and there's like clicks down, so to say. And then the last thing that it sounds like would be like the lighter feature would be like comparing snapshots in time for deltas, right? Like,
yeah,
to see like this used to have a due date of a month ago. Like a month ago it was 3 months out, now it's 6, like being able to like quickly flag that. Conversations.
That's a great point. When I was looking through this, I was thinking in the mindset of building it as opposed to thinking in a mindset of its use pattern while I'm in the middle of it. And yeah, definitely within my scope and role, there'll be points in time where it's like, I see a progress, but to me, what that means is we're behind progress and the end date is actually farther out than what's being shown, right? Because the amount of time each of these things are going to take hasn't changed, but the duration of one of them has changed, and now it's moving things farther out. So yeah, the ability to have those indicators of concern or where to drill in is definitely a use case that I would look to as I'm using this kind of going forward.
Kind of leading you a little bit, but I'm sure you noticed that you can't edit the dates directly on the roadmap. Was that something that, okay.
Yeah, I did notice that this was for me, and my my pattern of use for this in the current state would be for reporting. And that's the lens that I was using as I was looking at it. I wasn't looking at this as this gives me a window, much like a board gives me a window, but in a board setting, I can move things around. I can make quick adjustments in priority and other things. This one, I didn't have a sense of moving things around or making adjustments in it, which is probably more used to in seeing something in this type of format, or even in that first image that I showed. Typically, the only thing that would move, and you already have it, right, is the point in time that we're currently at. But whenever there is a material adjustment, then it comes into the question of, okay, well, where do I need to make that material adjustment, right? If a phase has changed, how hard is it going to be to go back in and change that phase across all the individual items within it, right? If I'm using labels and I have, a phase 2 label, right? That sets everything within it. Everybody's tagged all their things with the phase 2 label. And I go and say, oh, well, actually, this is now part of phase 3, or we've collapsed phase 2 and 3 together. Now it's just phase 2. I haven't explored whether or not there's a quick and easy way to just go, yeah, get rid of phase 3 label from everywhere. It's gone now. But more importantly, replace phase 3 label with phase 2 label, because really phase 3 is now all phase 2. My assumption on how I would use the tool is to say, bring up the list of filtered things that are all phase 3, and then I got to go into each one and just apply this label to each one individually in a hopefully rapid fashion, because there could be. I mean, I've been on programs with thousands of tasks. Is fairly common in my kind of corporate use case.
Okay, so that's super interesting in that you're viewing this more as a report. So the fact that it's not editable isn't as concerning, as long as you can get the right filtered view. And as long as there's a way for you from here to launch into editing fairly easily.
So a great example is what I just did in here, where I clicked on a single item and it took me to this view of that item. Normally within a roadmap, I would wonder, okay, if I'm clicking over here, again, it's taking me into the individual epic, right? I have been in situations where tool sets flowed within the tool, within that view itself, like into other views, right? But I don't know that I would be looking in a roadmap view to be able to switch to a board view of something without going to boards. That seems very natural to me, to go over to that left panel and to switch to a board view. Now, Where that isn't necessarily the same is if I've filtered this roadmap going into the same filtered board view is not necessarily something that I know that I can do.
No.
And that is something that would make sense.
Or like a list view.
If I was a user to say, hey, yes, I'm in the roadmap view. I've done my filtering to see the roadmap that I care about. And now I want to see the list view of that. And now I want to see the board view of that. Can I do that without having to recreate it in multiple places? Would be a natural pattern for me to do.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. And you would do that just to kind of fill in the blanks. For example, in the use case that you mentioned where phase 2 is gone, you're collapsing it, you now want to go look at that list so that you can go edit all of the things.
Right, right, absolutely. Or in the use case of I'm a middle tier between the people who are doing the work and the stakeholder, and the stakeholders ask me a question about this phase of the project. I'm pulling up just that phase, but then I realize there's some issue with it, and I have to go and now find who do I have to relate that to. And in some of those other views, it's a little bit easier to go and find that. Like I may see as part of the phase that there's an issue within what's in progress and what's not. I would go to a board to try to address that as opposed to going to a list. Or like we talked about, a label problem, and I see that and I want to go to the list now to make that label change. It might be across a group, right? Something that happens a lot. I'm in a long tail effort, and structurally teams change. So now I've got this work that I put together to make this view work for me managing the effort, but now the team has moved to a different group. And now I'm saying, okay, how do I fix that in my view? How do I go and address that? And that might be a structural change that I have to go from the roadmap to a board, make those changes, to a list, make the changes there. I could see doing that as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we touched on, it's pretty straightforward, but basically showing items from other groups, right? So being able to have an epic within your security department group and linking it to epics, I assume in like the .com and
it's
.org.
I guess the way in which I would think about it is today, right? I'm looking at the GitLab security department's roadmap, and in it there's sub-departments. And I could filter this to see those sub-departments and all of the different stuff that's nested underneath their groups. But if I'm doing an effort that is with one of those sub-departments and a group outside, then my assumption would be I have to actually go up to the GitLab.com level, look at the roadmap for that entire level, and then try to figure out some way of filtering it so that I get all those sub teams that are working together into that roadmap view. And that that works from a technical perspective, but it doesn't work from the mind mapping, how I would think about a program that I've created or a project with different teams that are working on it from that perspective. Because the comment that I got from someone who's been here a long time and has used the roadmap functionality more than I did was, oh, you can do that. You just have to structure the work differently, and it's not going to make sense for what you're trying to do. It will make sense once you look at the roadmap because it'll have all the things in it, but you have to go into it with, I want it to fit on the roadmap, so I have to do it this way, right? As opposed to, I'm putting a program together and these are the teams that are related to the program. By putting that program together and relating those teams, now I have a roadmap that's going to have just those views to it.
So yeah, let's walk through that,
Mhm.
how that would work. So let's say you're putting together a program, you identify 4 different teams that will be contributing to it.
Yep.
Uh, from there, basically the teams would create the things that they're contributing to it, the objects, whether it be like epics or stories or.
There would be projects,
Mhm,
epics, and stories or issues related to their part of it.
mhm,
There could be projects that have pieces of work done by each of those groups in that one project, which
mhm.
today I know creates a different issue, a different
Yeah.
problem that we have to solve for. Uh, but that's how I think about the idea of our portfolio or program,
Mhm,
is that it's a grouping of efforts, and then within those efforts, they model the same thinking, right? Who's related to it, what work is related to it, and then how do you bring all of that related stuff together into visualizations that make it easy to manage.
mhm. Yeah, and that's the last part. Like you would have access to see all of the work that they're doing related to this effort, but you may
Yep.
not see all the total work that they're doing because they may be doing work outside of what you're.
That is nothing to do with me, and
Mhm,
maybe functionally confidential to that group, that having that visibility will create a problem. Like
mhm.
today we have confidential projects within the security space um, that could need group member and teams outside of security to do work, but not everybody should necessarily see the work that's going on in that space.
And just because you're working with a team that's working on some of that doesn't mean you can see that side of their work. You can see a portion of it that's relevant to you.
Right.
And
Right.
also you might not want all that noise, right? Like.
Again, that's really where it comes down to, right? It's the filter out the noise so that you have the meaningful and relevant work in your uh, visualization,
Mhm.
right? And that's where, as a user, if I go up to the github.com level and say I got to start my roadmap there, I have a barrier, right? A trust and comfort barrier to, now I've got to pull all the work within that space. Am I comfortable with
Filter
that?
it
Is it,
all down.
and now how granular do I have to filter down just to get that level of visibility?
Mhm.
And I do know that some folks are much more comfortable with that, and they'll just drill in and throw the filter together fairly easily to pull that because they're used to doing it. Whereas a new user, for someone like me, that barrier is a little bit higher because I'm like, okay, well, how do I find it? Am I going to create a filter or create a label and just throw it everywhere so that I don't have to do this complex filtering? But now I've created a label and used it
Yeah.
in a pattern that may not make sense, just to make me feel more comfortable about doing the activity that I was going to do anyway.
Yeah, so actually, I have I guess a trick question for you because we talked about a lot of different things, right, that we could do to
Sure,
make this the tool friendlier to you and your use case. But
sure.
if you had to pick one thing that you feel like if we did this one change, it would make GitLab way better for you, what would it be?
I would say that first thing that I mentioned about creating custom ranging
Mm-hmm.
to allow for the idea of phases, because it's a cross-cutting item that I don't think I think would make the most first sense for me, because um, when I think in the multi-dimensional space of a roadmap, and I walk down the left-hand side in the grouping of work, I don't necessarily think of the phase. I think of the phase as a grouping of time, not a grouping of work. Even though you could do it as a grouping of work, it's not how I think about it.
How
So when you get to years, quarters, months, and days, all of those make very sense in a linear fashion. But like that image that I showed in the first step, this idea of these things happen in this order over time makes it a grouping of time in my mind, not a grouping of work.
How is that different than milestones as we have them today?
How is that different as it? So in today's milestones, I don't, and this may be new user not knowing, right? The grouping of milestones groups work together over a period of point in time. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so that the fact that the milestones are living here in this left-hand section confuses me as a user.
I see.
Because I can't click into a milestone and see just the groupings of work on the left-hand side that fit together. Whereas I scroll down here and say, oh, this is this milestone. Well, if I can't scroll and see which of these epics fit into that milestone.
So it's like a grouping by milestone kind of view.
If it was at the top, then I could say, functionally, these are the milestones, and I would expect all of the time-related work, the epics and issues, the time would only fit within that milestone area.
And also, I think probably the terminology milestones doesn't help.
That
Since it means something different for you.
It does mean something very specific in the project program portfolio management realm. Whereas I definitely can see if you say groupings of effort within a milestone.
Yeah,
makes
like
sense.
phases or even iterations.
Right.
Basically anything other than milestones.
Well, and that was, that's probably separate to this discussion, but the idea of, things having an iteration, a release, a target, right? When you look at an issue, there's all those things in that right-hand panel. In theory, those are groupings that don't make it to this view.
Yes.
So in theory, if I have an iteration and that iteration equates to the same thing, but it's a milestone, should I have some way of seeing that easily, right? Or a release relates to a milestone because it's exactly the same thing, but I have to create it as a milestone to be able to show it up on this report, as opposed to using feature or functionality that's already there, grouping together work, and allowing that to be viewed here.
Yeah,
instead.
So essentially like rationalizing all of the objects that represent time.
Groupings of work over time.
And so rationalizing, explaining, consolidating, or at least explaining the differences, linking them in some sort of logical way, and then having a way to show them here, because this is a time view of work.
Yes. Yes. I agree with that, because I could see, functionally, I could see this milestone section having a choice of whether you want to see milestones, iterations, releases, whatever those groupings are, and you're just choosing what flavor of those groupings you're looking at, or multiple flavors, because in something complex, you might need to see the iterations that fit within a release.
And the release.
Right?
Like this is when I'm working on it, this is when it's shipping.
Right. And that's a very common use case that would flow into something like a project, to be able to say, my project has this number of releases in it, my project has this number of iterations in it, my project has this many epics in it. And these are where they happen in a time related fashion.
That makes a lot of sense.
Hopefully this was helpful.
It was. So now the last question is, what did you end up doing? Are you kind of doing your own report in Drive somewhere?
Yes.
Okay.
So So the Rollup Report, my recommendation back to Jonathan was the Rollup Report for Eric really just needs to stay in PowerPoint. If he's using it for that purpose with these other slides, you can't solve that without doing the same thing that you're doing today. You could get information, and you could find that information a little bit easier, so that creating that PowerPoint maybe takes a little bit less time. But you're going to have to put that effort into creating the view that's going to make that time smaller. So it may not, as an ROI, you may not actually see the ROI for a long time, right? Because if it takes me, 3 hours to put a view together, then I'm only going to get like a 5-minute savings on doing a deck. Then do I do that, or do I just do the deck, right?
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is super helpful. I'm gonna stop the recording now.
Sounds good.